Thank you guys all so much for coming tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chrissy West, and I am one of our New Hampshire chapter leaders for Say Yes to Recess. I am a mom of two public school kids. They are aged 6 and 10, so they're going into the third and sixth grade. I'm also a doctor of physical therapy, and I have been working in our New Hampshire public schools for the last 15 years. So tonight, while we go over the agenda, if you would like to just take a quick moment to introduce yourself in the chat box, let me know who you are. So are you a parent, an educator, legislator, or a community member? Let us know where you're from. And then just a little fun fact, what does recess mean to you? And while you all go ahead and do that, I'll go over the plan for tonight. So we will talk about what recess is. I'll share a brief history of recess. We'll discuss some of the benefits and power that recess has on learning and development. And then I'll give you a quick overview of the Say Yes to Recess mission and answer any questions you may have at the end. So first, the big question is, what is recess? So while this question seems obvious, it's actually defined slightly different in the literature. So there are several leading organizations across medicine, public health, education, and child development that all support recess, but in their works, they describe it slightly different depending on their own focus areas. So I'm not going to go over each of the bullet points, but we do have the Center of Disease Control, so the CDC. We have the Global Recess Alliance. We have the American Academy of Pediatrics, so the AAP. And the AAP actually put out an updated policy statement this year called The Crucial Role of Recess. So this was updated in June of 2026. And if you haven't had a chance to read that yet, I highly recommend looking it up. It has a lot of great information in it. We also then have Shape America, and lastly, we have the National Network of Public Health Institutes. So while they all do vary slightly on certain principles, they also all agree on a few major points. That quality recess should be regularly scheduled. They all say that it should be child-directed play, so children should have the freedom to choose what they want to participate in during this time. They all agree that recess is a break from academic demands and it supports physical, cognitive, social, and emotional development. They also all agree that recess should be safe, inclusive, and accessible to all children. It should be separate from physical education, and recess should be protected from being withheld as punishment. So these things that all these organizations agree on are actually qualities that we use at Say Yes to Recess when we are trying to determine our organization's goals and any legislation policy that we want to move forward, which we will discuss later in the presentation. So before we talk about the benefits of recess, it's important to understand the history of recess. So back in the late 1800s, public education was beginning to expand and more children were starting to attend public schools. And as this happened, educators had quickly realized that children couldn't sit and learn effectively for long periods of time. So they started introducing breaks that were primarily outdoors and were free play. So during this time, there wasn't any research to really support that recess was needed, but teachers just intuitively knew that giving kids these breaks would be beneficial. And after they started implementing this, they noticed that kids were more calmer, they were more focused, and they were better able to learn. We then move into the early 1900s, and this is when the school day started to lengthen and recess became a regular part of the school day. So these breaks were again outdoors and child-led, and they were recognized as an important part of educating the whole child. So during this early 1900 time period, there was also a movement called the playground movement, and I won't go over that in tonight's presentation, but it is an interesting piece of history if that's something you wanted to look up after the presentation as well. As we moved into the 1950s and 1970s, recess continued to grow and it was being offered multiple times a school day. There's actually some historical sources that will say or suggest that recess was actually about a third of the school day. And just a little fun fact that during the same time period, the US was widely recognized as a leader in public education. So other countries around the world, like Finland, they started studying our education system as they were working to develop and refine their own educational systems. And today, many of those countries continue to prioritize these regular recess breaks and outdoor play that we once had an abundance of. In fact, several of these countries actually give their students 15 minutes of recess for every 45 minutes of instructional time. And these countries are considered among the highest performing in the world. So really, recess was widely accepted and respected throughout the 1970s. And then, unfortunately, starting in the 1980s, there became a major shift. In 1983, there was a report that came out called A Nation at Risk, and this raised concerns that America's educational system was falling behind. So in the report, it had stated that SAT scores were down 40 to 50 points, and the US was losing its rank in education compared to other countries around the world. So this sparked a movement towards increased instructional time and raising academic expectations. And while the report never recommended that recess should be reduced, unfortunately, recess time had then subsequently began to decrease to make more time for instruction. And just another fun fact is that about 10 years later, after this report came out, so about 1993, Sandia National Laboratories was asked to do a longitudinal study on academics in the US, and they had concluded that maybe the American system was not failing behind after all. To summarize their findings, what they had pointed out was essentially that the population of people taking SAT scores had been drastically increased. So a lot of people who had fewer educational opportunities were now starting to take these tests and apply for college. And when they took the data from the research that was in A Nation at Risk, they found that when they disaggregated the data by groups of people, that the majority of groups were actually improving despite the overall opinion that everybody was doing worse. But unfortunately, at that time, changes were already made to our system. Then in 2002, we had No Child Left Behind Act come out, which just continued to increase the pressures. So schools started placing greater emphasis on standardized testing and maximizing classroom time. And this led to even further cuts in recess. In fact, there were even schools around the early 2000s, like Chicago and Atlanta, that began building schools without playgrounds or recess spaces. During those times, again, there wasn't a lot of research on recess, but thankfully we had experts in the field who were beginning to study it. And now we have decades of research that validate what those early educators had recognized more than a century ago. And that's children learn better when they have opportunities for movement and play, and recess helps children reset throughout their school days. So that leads us to the power of recess. So the big question is, what exactly is the research telling us? While there are so many benefits to recess, tonight we are going to focus on 5 different areas. We're going to talk about learning and academic achievement, executive function, social and emotional development, physical health, and school climate. So, looking at learning and academic achievement, as we had discussed, researchers have documented a significant shift since the early 1980s, where there's been much more emphasis on academic expectations and greater emphasis on academic instruction and literacy. And there's also research to show that during these same times, there are less opportunities for play and child-directed learning. You've probably heard the expression that kindergarten has become the new first grade, and this is essentially where that has come from. Along with higher academic expectations, children are also expected to maintain attention for longer periods of time, which can then lead to cognitive fatigue. And what's interesting is researchers aren't able to give us an exact number of how long kids can pay attention because every child's going to have different preferences to activities. Every activity is going to have varying degrees of motivation, and every environment is going to have various stimuli that allow someone to concentrate or not concentrate on particular tasks. However, many experts in child development do use a general rule that kids are able to sustain attention for about 2 to 3 minutes per year of age before needing a mental reset. So, say we have a 5-year-old, they might be able to sustain attention for 10 to 15 minutes, or a 10-year-old may be able to sustain attention for 20 to 30 minutes. Now, when we think about the typical school day here in New Hampshire, those school days are usually about 6.5, 7 hours long, and they're designed to have a maximum of 5 hours and 45 minutes of instructional time a day, which the majority of our schools are doing. And during that school day, most kids maybe get a 20-minute break for lunch, maybe 30 minutes if they're lucky, and then they might get another 15 to 30 minutes of recess. Now, every school is going to be different because here in the state, we don't have any policies that protect or mandate certain time blocks for these activities. And what's another interesting point is when you think about what these time blocks actually look like, or if you've ever worked in a school, you know that a child may have 20 to 30 minutes of recess, but they don't always get that full amount of time. So during these blocks, sometimes kids are having to do things like waiting in line. They're waiting for their peers to get ready. They might have to be cleaning up before they can go outside. Or here in New Hampshire, winter time's very challenging because kids are having to take their snow gear on and off. And that can take up quite a bit of time, especially in those younger grades when those kids are still learning these skills. So essentially, the question is, how does recess help all of this? So as the AAP describes recess, they say recess serves as a temporary suspension of academic cognitive effort. So when children are provided with opportunities for unstructured play, they're then able to get a break from those constant mental demands of things like following directions, focusing, exercising self-control so that they can stay on task. And this allows for their attention systems to recover. So when students return to the classroom, they're able to better focus on their tasks, they can regulate their behaviors, and they can engage more in their learning. Now, along with academic achievement and learning, we've got to talk about executive functioning. So, executive function has become an increasing hot topic in education. And for those of you who are not familiar with this terminology, executive function is often described as the brain's air traffic control system. So basically, it's a set of cognitive skills that help us do things like plan and organize, pay attention, remember instructions, control our impulses, or adapt when things don't go as we expect. Research consistently shows that there's a strong association between executive function skills and academic performance. Now, when we talk about executive functioning, it's really important to note that these skills develop throughout our childhood and they actually don't mature until our mid-20s. So I love sharing the animation that's here on this screen. It does a great job kind of showing what's happening in the developing brain. So in the early years, that's when the brain is more of those yellows and greens. The brain has an enormous amount of neural connections. And as children age, the pathways that are frequently used become stronger, while the pathways that aren't used as often get pruned away. And this pruning is actually what makes the brain become more efficient. So, in layman terms, skills that are consistently practiced essentially become ingrained into our brains. So if you look at the top of the image here, this is what we call the prefrontal cortex. It's right here behind our forehead. And it's one of the last regions of the brain to fully mature. That's this blue and purple that's kind of growing up the brain. And this prefrontal cortex is the area of our brain that is primarily responsible for these executive functioning skills. So, as parents and educators, it's really important for us to understand that these skills can take years to develop and they require repeated opportunities in order to practice these skills. We're also starting to see schools implementing more programs that are explicitly teaching executive functioning because we're seeing more kids struggle in some of these areas, and that's due to like a large variety of reasons that we won't get into at this time. But it's important to recognize that while these programs can be incredibly helpful, it's also vital that our kids are getting the opportunity to practice these skills in real time and during experiences that are meaningful to them, which recess can be an ideal place for this. So, recess doesn't explicitly teach executive functioning, but when recess is unstructured and allows for peer-to-peer play, it gives children repeated opportunities to use their skills in activities that they are choosing to engage in. And we know that kids are going to learn best when they are interested and invested in what they're doing. So I won't go over all of these examples, but let's just take a look at a few. We have like playing tag. So tag works on impulse control by requiring that children modulate their speed. So they have to learn when to stop, when to go, or when to change their direction at just the right moments to avoid getting tagged or running into another player, knocking them down. They're also having to practice cognitive flexibility. So if they get tagged during that game, they have to learn to accept that outcome and they need to adjust to the rules, which means they may need to wait out until the next round before they can get in back into the game. We also have like Foursquare. So during Foursquare, children are working, or excuse me, they're using their working memory and self-control. So they need to remember the rules. They need to wait their turn. They may need to anticipate where that ball is going and adjust their strategy accordingly. And lastly, we'll just look at pretend play. So whether they're playing superheroes or exploring outer space, they're creating a plan together. So they're listening to others' ideas. They may need to negotiate rules or adapt the story as others come up with new ideas for their play. So all of these recess activities may at first look like just play, but they're actually giving kids authentic ways to continuously practice these skills and activities that are fun and meaningful to them. So moving on, we have social and emotional development. So one of the biggest challenges that schools are seeing today is the growing number of kids who are struggling with anxiety and emotional dysregulation. So according to the CDC, we know that about 28% of children are currently affected by various mental, behavioral, or developmental disorders. And roughly 11% of kids between the ages of 3 and 17 have been diagnosed with anxiety. And when you have a diagnosis of anxiety, there's this chronic state of stress. And it not only affects how a child feels, but it also affects their brain and changes the way that they're learning. So, with chronic stress, our body releases cortisol, which you may have heard of before. This is the primary stress hormone. And when these levels are elevated for extended periods of time, it can interfere with things like attention, memory, and learning. However, from research, we do know that recess can help shift this balance. Recess can provide opportunities for joyful movement and physical activity that can help stimulate neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, endorphins. These are all chemicals that help support emotional well-being and help prepare the brain for learning by supporting attention and motivation. So there's actually a study that was conducted by the Link Project out of Texas, and we will talk about the Link Project a little bit later. But they found that children who were receiving 45 minutes of daily recess had significantly lower levels of cortisol after just 3 months compared to children who were only getting 30 minutes of daily recess. So remember, we were just talking about that prefrontal cortex. Recess doesn't just strengthen executive function skills through repeat practice, but it also helps create the neurochemical environment that allows some of these skills to work more effectively. And another challenge that many children are facing is navigating peer relationships. So, social skills develop over time with life experiences. And sometimes kids may come into school where they haven't had a lot of opportunities to independently practice these social skills like negotiation, cooperation, or conflict resolution with peers. And there's several reasons for this. Many of them are societal changes like increased screen time, the effects of COVID. Kids' schedules are structured more now than they've ever been before. And another thing may be having safe play environments or unsafe play environments. Recess can give all children that safe environment where they can consistently engage with their peers and practice these social skills on a daily basis. And one of my favorite perspectives comes from Peter Gray, who wrote the book Free to Learn. He explains that kids are more willing to compromise and negotiate if they are invested in their play and they want it to continue. So, true, authentic social learning is much more effective during play than just doing something because you've been instructed to do so. And just another little fun fact, sad fact actually, but according to the CDC, the average school-age child is on electronic devices for about 7.5 hours a day. So when you look at the big picture, we are saying kids are in school for 7 hours a day. They're on devices 7 to 8 hours a day, and then they should be sleeping 9 to 10 hours a day. This significantly limits face-to-face social interactions and those real in-person experiences. Next, we'll move on to physical health. So the AAP, or the American Academy of Pediatrics, recommends that children should get at least 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity each day. And we know that only 20 to 28% of these school-age kids are actually meeting this recommendation. And at the same time, 1 in every 3 children are considered overweight or obese. So schools are one of the few places where every child can have a safe environment that guarantees the opportunity to play and to move. Now, we know physical activity strengthens our heart, our muscles, our bones, but it can also build a stronger brain. So every time a child runs, climbs, jumps, or balances, they're developing gross motor skills, like coordination and postural control. So these movements are requiring that the brain constantly is integrating information from our various systems. So we have our visual system, we have our vestibular system, which is also known for balance, and we have our proprioceptive system, which helps with body awareness. So this is essential in helping the brain and body communicate to do classroom tasks like being able to sit upright or visually scan between the board that the teacher is teaching from and the paper that you're working on, or even completing writing tasks and being able to scan your paper from left to right. Physical activity also increases blood flow and oxygen to the brain. It also stimulates the release of what we call the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, so also known as BDNF. This has been big in the research, and it's often referred to as the fertilizer of the brain. So, BDNF is a protein that essentially helps the neurons grow stronger connections, which then support memory and learning. So, in other words, movement helps the brain become more efficient. And lastly, we know that research also has shown a consistent positive association between physical fitness and academic achievement. Kids that are more physically fit, they tend to perform better in areas of academic achievement, attention, and executive functioning. And oh, so beyond the brain, regular physical activity also supports a healthy immune system and it improves our sleep quality. So we know that sleep is vital for the brain to consolidate new information that we learn throughout the day and then store it into memory. So when we think about recess, it's important to think past the idea that it's just kids running around, but rather they are creating the biological conditions that help the brain to learn, regulate, remember, and grow. And lastly, we'll just talk quickly about how recess helps support school climate. So everything that we have previously talked about not only is going to benefit the individual child, but it's also going to help shape the classroom and even the entire school. So quality recess can help create a learning environment that's healthier, safer, and have kids feel more connected. One of the big challenges that schools are facing these days is chronic absenteeism. So, 24% of New Hampshire kids are considered chronically absent, which means they are missing more than 10% of their school year. So, as you can imagine, missing all of that time from school is going to affect your performance by missing out on instructions. And also, it affects your ability to build relationships with your peers. The research consistently shows us or tells us that when students feel safe and connected and like they belong, they not only are more likely to attend school, but they're also going to be more likely to engage in their learning. So, recess can help create this environment by giving kids the daily opportunity to build friendships, develop trust with peers and staff members, as well as develop the sense of being part of a strong community. Um, there's Playworks, which is a national nonprofit that helps schools implement quality recess practices. And they've done various studies, but one of them, or a few of them actually, have been about what happens with school climate when recess is intentionally supported. And they found that schools who were implementing their recess models had experienced 43% less bullying and exclusionary behavior. They had 20% higher rates of feeling safe at school. And they gained 34% faster transitions back to learning after recess. So these are meaningful improvements that extend beyond the playground, but also help support the classroom. And I know one of my favorite parts about working in the schools and about being able to go to recess is it gives us adults the opportunity to see the world through our students' eyes. So it helps us better understand our students' strengths and challenges and also to see their personality in unstructured times. Recess also allows for adults to coach independence when it's needed and support our kids as they're learning to navigate these real world social situations. So, to summarize the power of recess, it's really important to think of recess not as just a break, but as an educational, excuse me, but recess is part of our educational infrastructure that allows children in schools to thrive. Before we move on, I did want to take a quick minute just to share the LINK project, so LIINK. The LINK project is a research initiative conducted by Debbie Ray and her colleagues at Texas Christian University. And for their research, they had partnered with a variety of schools to study the impact of providing students with 4 15-minute recess breaks each day, along with a daily 15-minute character lesson. And they had several positive findings, as you can see from this infographic. But the primary ones that I wanted to point out were they had found children had a 40% reduction in off-task behaviors. And they also scored 10% higher in math and 7% higher in reading on standardized testing by the fourth grade. So these are pretty impressive statistics. And if you wanted to learn more about the Link project, there is a QR code here you can scan, or you can just simply Google them and they should come right up. So we've looked at a lot of what the research has been telling us for decades. And we've seen how recess supports learning, executive function, physical health, social and emotional, and overall school climate. So the big question is, how do we ensure that every child has access to quality daily recess? And first, we'll start quickly by just looking at recess here in New Hampshire. So despite everything we know and all the benefits of recess, New Hampshire still does not require recess for any students in any grade level. The good news is New Hampshire does allow for recess to count as instructional time for grades K through 6. So this removes one of the big concerns that schools are going to need to extend their school day to fit more time into their schedules. We at Say Yes to Recess believe the research that shows our children are engaged in academic blocks that are too long, and that they would benefit from more of that unstructured play and less of that seated instructional time, academic instructional time. So if we could cut 10 minutes from math and 10 minutes from reading and apply that to recess, that would be more beneficial for our kiddos. And another thing that Say Yes to Recess really wants to emphasize is our goal is much more than just requiring recess. We really want to be able to help define what quality recess looks like, how to have it be required daily, and have it protected so that every child can access it. So the big question, who is Say Yes to Recess? So Say Yes to Recess is a grassroots movement that was started in Tennessee by 3 moms who had realized that their kids were only getting outside for about 15 minutes each school day. And like many of us, they found that this was just unacceptable. So they worked together with their state legislators and they were able to get a bill unanimously passed for 40 minutes of daily recess. And while they were doing this work, they had realized that this wasn't only a problem in Tennessee, but it was actually a problem all across the country. So they started this movement to help other states advocate for recess change and to share all of the important information that they had learned throughout the process. Fast forward just a couple years later, and we are now in 20 states and growing. So essentially, all of our state chapters are made up of a community of advocates that are working to restore and protect recess through legislative work and community education. We're made up of parents, educators, professionals, and a variety of different community members. So our goal is to support both our students and our educators because we know that when our kids are thriving, so don't our classrooms. And our mission goals are supported by research. So as you can see, these are what we want to have included in our policy. So ultimately, we want kids grades K through 6 to have 60 minutes of daily recess with provisions for older students. So if you have read the AAP's latest recess policy statement, they actually recommend that all students, kindergarten all the way up through high school, get break time, which we support. We also define recess as unstructured peer-to-peer play, and we've already discussed many of the reasons for that. We believe recess should be outdoors when the weather allows because we know that being outside has shown to improve mood and attention. And being outside also provides sensory experiences that can be really hard to replicate indoors. So this can lead to increased self-regulation, and it helps with that communication between the brain and the body that we had discussed earlier. We would like for recess to be screen-free, of course, with exceptions for 504s and IEPs. We want our kids engaging with each other, and we want them being creative in their real-world surroundings. We also believe that recess should not be withheld or altered for punishment or makeup work. And this has been also supported by various organizations like the ones that we had discussed earlier on. We know that it's the kids who typically lose their recess that are often the kids who need it the most. There is also no research that shows removing recess actually helps with behaviors, but there's plenty of research out there that shows recess helps with behaviors. We also want it so that recess can complement physical education, but it should never replace it. So, PE, physical education, is a structured time where kids are learning physical literacy and it is adult structured and instructed, where recess should be unstructured and in an environment where kids can engage in the activities that they feel that are important to their brains and bodies each day. And lastly, recess should count as instructional time because recess is not just extra time, it's instructional because the research shows that children are learning during recess, just in different way. And I'll end the presentation with this. So research tells us why recess matters, and now it's up to all of us to make sure that every child has access to it. So every child deserves the opportunity to move, connect, and learn through play every day at school. And whether you're a parent, an educator, healthcare professional, policymaker, or community member, there's always a place for you at our table in making that vision a reality. So thank you for listening tonight. I will stop screen sharing.